Have you ever witnessed someone stripped of their dignity in public, humiliated for the very faith that sustains them? Today's narrative plunges into that raw wound of shame, but it carries within it a luminous thread of grace, redemption, and the quiet power of unwavering compassion. This is a story about what happens when pride meets humility, when scorn encounters mercy, and when the world's measurements of worth collide with something infinitely more valuable. The leather of his work boots was cracked like dried riverbed mud, and Samuel Whitfield knew it. 43 years old, weathered by sun and soil, he stood in the marble lobby of Ashmont City Bank, with his calloused hands gripping a worn black Bible. The book had belonged to his grandfather, its edges softened by decades of reading, its pages marked with underlined passages and handwritten notes in fading ink. Samuel's flannel shirt, faded blue-grey and patched at one elbow, hung loose over his denim overalls. Dirt rimmed his fingernails despite his morning scrubbing. He was a man who smelled of honest earth and dawn. The banker, Victor Langford, emerged from his glass-walled office like a peacock displaying plumage. 57 years old, with silver temples that he paid $200 monthly to maintain at precise perfection, Victor wore a navy suit that cost more than Samuel's monthly mortgage payment. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor with the rhythm of authority. Everything about Victor announced success. His platinum cufflinks, his Swiss watch, his cologne that whispered of boardrooms and exclusive clubs. "Ah, Mr. Whitfield," Victor's voice carried across the lobby, loud enough that 3 tellers and 7 customers turned to look. "How rustic of you to visit us in person." Samuel shifted his weight, feeling the eyes on him. "Mr. Langford, thank you for seeing me." "Well, I confess I was curious." Victor gestured toward his office but made no move to lower his voice. "It's not often we have a farmer requesting to discuss financial matters beyond the scope of his seasonal crop loan." The word farmer dripped from Victor's mouth like something distasteful. They entered Victor's office, and Samuel noticed immediately that Victor left the glass door open, angled so the entire lobby could witness their conversation. Victor settled into his high-backed leather chair, while Samuel perched on the edge of a chair that felt too small and too expensive for him. "I've been working the Whitfield land for 7 generations now," Samuel began, placing his Bible carefully on his lap. "My great-great-great-grandfather—" Yes, generational farming. How quaint." Victor's smile never reached his eyes. "I trust you're here about the loan renewal for next season's planting." "Actually, sir, I wanted to discuss a different matter. There's a development opportunity." Victor's laugh cut through the air like scissors through silk. "A development opportunity? My dear Mr. Whitfield, do you have any idea how many development opportunities cross my desk each week? Ventures backed by Stanford MBAs, proposals with feasibility studies conducted by firms you've never heard of, investments with projected returns calculated by algorithms." "I understand, sir, but if you just look at the numbers—" "Numbers!" Victor leaned back, his chair squeaking. "Let me share something with you, Mr. Whitfield, from one businessman to another." The emphasis on businessman was surgical. "You work land, you plant seeds, you pray for rain." His eyes flickered to the Bible on Samuel's lap. "Or perhaps you pray for more than rain. But business, real business, requires more than—" He waved his hand dismissively. "Faith." Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Faith has sustained my family through 12 droughts, 4 floods, and the Depression." How inspirational! Victor's tone could have frozen water. "Tell me, does your Bible there have a chapter on market analysis? A psalm about risk assessment? Perhaps a proverb about leveraged buyouts?" Through the open door, Samuel could hear the lobby had gone quiet. Everyone was listening. "Sir, I've brought documentation." "I'm certain you have." Victor stood, signaling the meeting's end. "But let me save us both some time. This bank invests in serious ventures. We work with corporations, not men who carry ancient books and smell of manure." The cruelty in his smile intensified. Perhaps you might find a lending institution more suited to your level. Samuel rose slowly, dignity intact, despite the burning in his chest. He tucked his Bible under his arm. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Langford." "Oh, Mr. Whitfield," Victor called as Samuel reached the door. The entire lobby was watching now. "That book you're clutching so desperately? I don't imagine it has much to say about compound interest or portfolio diversification, does it? Perhaps that's why you farm dirt instead of building empires." A woman at the teller window gasped softly. Samuel's knuckles whitened around his Bible, but he turned back with a voice that carried no anger, only sadness. "It has quite a bit to say about humility, sir, and about storms." Victor's laughter followed him out of the bank, echoing off marble walls and beneath crystal chandeliers. Samuel walked 12 blocks to where he'd parked his truck, a 1998 Ford with rust blooming like orange flowers across its hood. He sat in the driver's seat for 7 minutes, hands shaking, before he opened his Bible. The passage he turned to, marked with a faded ribbon, spoke of treasures in heaven where moths and rust do not destroy. He read it 3 times before his hands stopped trembling. That night, Samuel knelt beside his bed in the farmhouse his grandfather had built. The wooden floors creaked under his weight, familiar and forgiving. He prayed not for vengeance, not for vindication, but for Victor Langford's soul. He prayed for the banker to see past the mirror of his own pride. He prayed for the strength to forgive, even when forgiveness felt like swallowing broken glass. Outside his window, the wind was changing. The next morning, Samuel woke at 4:30, as he had every morning for 26 years. He fed the chickens, checked the irrigation lines, and noticed something strange in the sky. The sunrise bled red and purple across the horizon, colors too vivid, too angry. The air felt thick, electric. By noon, every weather station within 300 miles was broadcasting the same emergency alert. A supercell system had formed with unprecedented speed, spawning tornadoes and bringing winds that would make history. The storm's projected path cut directly through Ashmont City. "Folks, this is not a drill," the radio crackled in Samuel's kitchen. "The National Weather Service is calling this a potentially catastrophic event. If you are in the Ashmont metropolitan area, seek shelter immediately. We're seeing sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, with gusts approaching 160. This storm is going to hit Ashmont in approximately 4 hours." Samuel stood at his kitchen window, watching the sky turn the color of an old bruise. His farm sat on elevated ground 15 miles outside the city, positioned in what meteorologists called a wind shadow, behind a ridge of ancient hills. He would be safe. The city would not. He thought of Victor Langford, of that glass-walled office, of those marble columns that would offer no protection against what was coming. He reached for his keys. The roads into Ashmont were a river of vehicles flowing outward. Samuel's truck moved against the current, alone in the inbound lane, while thousands fled. The wind had already arrived, buffeting his vehicle, sending debris skittering across the highway. The sky roiled with clouds that moved in ways clouds should not move, rotating, descending, reaching. His radio continued its litany of warnings. "All bridges into downtown will be closing in 30 minutes. Police are implementing mandatory evacuation protocols. If you are not already out of the city center, you need to leave now." Samuel pressed harder on the accelerator. Downtown Ashmont was transforming into a ghost town. Storefronts were boarded, streets emptied, and the few remaining people ran with the frantic energy of prey sensing a predator. Samuel pulled up in front of Ashmont City Bank just as the first real gust hit, strong enough to rock his truck on its suspension. There, on the marble steps beneath those imposing columns, stood Victor Langford. The banker's immaculate suit was disheveled, his perfect silver hair whipped into disarray. His face, usually so controlled and composed, showed naked fear. He was on his phone, shouting into it, but the wind stole his words. When he saw Samuel's truck, his expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and finally, desperate hope. Samuel climbed out, having to brace himself against the truck's door. The wind screamed between buildings, creating a sound like 1,000 wolves howling. Debris tumbled past. Newspapers, roof shingles, a child's bicycle. "Whitfield!" Victor stumbled down the steps and Samuel noticed the banker was limping. "My car won't start. The evacuation buses are gone. I've called 12 services." "Get in!" Samuel had to shout to be heard over the wind. Victor hesitated for only a moment before his survival instinct overrode his pride. He scrambled toward the passenger door. Samuel noticed then what Victor clutched in his left hand, a leather portfolio, expensive and monogrammed, undoubtedly containing documents Victor deemed too important to leave behind. They both climbed into the truck, just as something large and metallic crashed into the street behind them. Samuel didn't look to see what it was. He threw the truck into gear and accelerated away from downtown. "The bridges!" Victor gasped, pointing. "The Riverside Bridge is still open." "Not going to the bridges," Samuel said, his voice steady, despite his racing heart. "They'll be clogged, and the storm's going to hit them hardest. We're going around." "Around?" Victor's voice pitched higher. "Around where? The storm is everywhere." "I know a way." Samuel navigated through the city's western edge, taking roads he'd traveled for decades, delivering produce, visiting markets, helping neighbors. The truck shuddered under wind gusts that grew stronger by the minute. Rain began to fall, not drops but sheets, turning the windshield into a waterfall even with the wipers at full speed. "We're going to die," Victor whispered, gripping the dashboard. "We're going to die because you think you know better than—" "I need you to be quiet and let me drive," Samuel interrupted, but his tone was gentle, not harsh. They emerged onto a rural route that skirted the city's perimeter. Here the buildings provided some shelter, but Samuel knew that protection was temporary. He pushed the truck to 60 miles per hour, faster than the old vehicle liked, but speed was their only ally now. The tornado siren began its wail, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. "There!" Victor pointed ahead, and Samuel's blood went cold. A funnel cloud, thick and black as midnight, was descending from the roiling sky approximately 2 miles ahead. It touched down in a field, kicking up a column of dirt that reached the clouds. The tornado was moving, and its trajectory would cross their path. Samuel made a split-second decision. He yanked the wheel right, taking them down a narrow dirt road he'd traveled 10,000 times. The road cut through farmland, between wheat fields that now laid flat, pressed down by wind, as if by an invisible hand. "Where are you going?" Victor's shout was more prayer than question. "Grayson Hollow, old railway tunnel, been abandoned for 40 years, but the structure's solid." The truck bounced over ruts and potholes, its suspension screaming. The tornado was visible in Samuel's side mirror now, a churning column of destruction that was gaining on them. The sound was overwhelming, like a freight train mixed with a jet engine, so loud it seemed to come from inside Samuel's skull. Victor had stopped talking. His face was ashen, his knuckles white where they gripped the seat. They rounded a bend, and the tunnel entrance appeared, a dark mouth in the hillside, partially obscured by overgrown vines. Samuel aimed for it, the truck's engine howling, and they plunged into darkness just as the tornado's edge caught them. The rear of the truck lifted, actually lifted, and for a moment Samuel felt weightless. Then gravity reasserted itself with a bone-jarring crash. The truck slid sideways, its tires losing traction on the tunnel's old rails and gravel. Samuel fought the wheel, tapped the brakes, and managed to straighten them out as they slid deeper into the tunnel's protective embrace. Behind them, through the tunnel entrance, they could see the tornado pass. It was like watching the end of the world. The funnel was so massive it filled the entire view, a rotating wall of debris and destruction. Trees, pieces of buildings, vehicles, objects Samuel couldn't identify, all swirled in its grip. The noise was unbearable. The truck rocked violently despite being underground. Dust rained from the tunnel's ceiling. Samuel prayed the structure would hold. Victor was no longer the proud banker. He had curled into himself, eyes squeezed shut, lips moving in what might have been prayer, tears tracking through the dirt on his cheeks. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the tornado moved on. The sound diminished from unbearable to merely terrible to finally, after 7 minutes that felt like hours, to an eerie silence. Samuel's ears rang. His hands ached from gripping the wheel. He looked over at Victor and found the banker staring at him with an expression Samuel had never seen before on that proud face. "You," Victor's voice cracked. "You came back for me." Samuel said nothing. He waited for his hands to stop shaking. "You came back into that." Oh, Victor gestured toward the tunnel entrance, where the world outside looked like a different planet. "After what I said to you, after I humiliated you, after I mocked your faith, your life, everything you—" His voice broke entirely. "We should wait here for a while," Samuel said quietly. "Make sure the worst has passed." "Why?" Victor whispered. "Why did you come back for me?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out his Bible, the same one he'd carried into Victor's office. He opened it to a marked passage and held it toward Victor, though in the tunnel's dimness, reading was difficult. "But love your enemies," Samuel recited from memory. "Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." Victor took the Bible with trembling hands. He stared at the page, at the underlined verses, at the handwritten notes in the margins in several different hands, across several generations. "I don't understand," Victor said. "I destroyed you in that office. I made you small in front of everyone. I laughed at you, at your faith, at everything you hold sacred." "I know. Then why?" Samuel turned to look directly at Victor, and the banker saw something in those weathered eyes that made him want to weep. It was not judgment. It was not righteous anger. It was something far more powerful and far more terrifying than either. It was love, because that's what he taught us. Samuel said simply. Not to love when it's easy, not to forgive when it's convenient, but to love our enemies, to pray for those who hurt us, to do good to those who do evil to us. He paused. "I prayed for you last night, Mr. Langford. I prayed that you'd find peace. I prayed that you'd see past the mirror of your own success to what really matters." Victor's face crumpled. The portfolio he'd been clutching, the one with all those important documents, slipped from his grasp and fell to the truck's floor, forgotten. "I have spent my entire life building," Victor whispered. "Building wealth, building status, building walls around myself to keep out people I deemed beneath me. People like you. And in 30 seconds, all of it almost—" He gestured toward where the tornado had been. "All of it is just paper and pride. Meaningless." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain, lighter now, drumming on the truck's roof. Dripping water echoed in the tunnel like a benediction. "I kept a journal," Victor said suddenly. "For 23 years, I've kept a journal of every deal I closed, every victory I won, every person I bested. I brought it to the office this morning to make notes about a particularly satisfying foreclosure." He laughed, but it was the sound of something breaking. "I was going to write about you, about how I put an uppity farmer in his place, about how I defended the sanctity of serious business against rural superstition." He looked at Samuel. "I left it in my office, along with everything else that I thought mattered. The only thing I grabbed was my portfolio, and you know what's in it? Quarterly reports, market analyses, everything that seemed crucial an hour ago and now seems like ash." "It's not too late to change," Samuel said. "To see differently, to be different." "How?" Victor's voice was raw. "How do I come back from being the man I've become?" Samuel thought for a long moment. "The same way anyone does, one choice at a time, one act of humility, one moment of seeing people not for what they can do for you, but for who they are, children of the same Creator, worthy of dignity and respect." Victor nodded slowly. He opened the Bible again, and this time Samuel saw him actually reading, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the words. After 30 minutes, Samuel judged it safe to emerge. They drove slowly out of the tunnel into a transformed world. The tornado had carved a path of devastation that was visible even from a distance. But the air was clearing, the rain softening to a drizzle, and in the west, impossibly, sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Samuel's truck navigated the debris-strewn roads back toward Ashmont. What they found was horrifying. The downtown area had been ravaged. Buildings Samuel had known his entire life were reduced to rubble. The bank, with its proud marble columns, had lost its entire western facade. Victor's glass office was simply gone, exposed to the sky like a dollhouse with its front removed. "My journal," Victor whispered, looking at the wreckage. "Everything I thought was important. All those victories I catalogued so carefully, gone." "But you're here," Samuel said. "You're alive, and that means you get to write a different story now." They spent the next 7 hours working together. Samuel's truck became a rescue vehicle, pulling people from damaged buildings, ferrying the injured to makeshift medical stations, hauling supplies to those who were trapped. Victor Langford, in his $1,000 suit now torn and muddy, worked alongside Samuel with an energy born of something new, purpose that wasn't about profit. Victor pulled a young mother and her 2 children from beneath a collapsed awning. He carried an elderly man on his back for 3 blocks when they found him trapped in his home. He held the hand of a dying woman until the paramedics arrived, whispering words of comfort he'd never thought to speak before. And through it all, Samuel was there, steady and calm, offering help without judgment, giving aid without keeping score, loving his neighbors, and yes, loving his enemy, with a quiet ferocity that changed everyone who saw it. As the sun set on that day of destruction and redemption, Samuel and Victor stood together in front of what remained of the bank. Victor's expensive car, the one that wouldn't start, sat crushed beneath a fallen beam, completely destroyed. "I suppose I'll need a ride home," Victor said, and for the first time he smiled without arrogance. "I suppose you will," Samuel agreed. They climbed back into the truck, both too exhausted for words. But as Samuel drove through the broken city toward the banker's expensive neighborhood on the north side, Victor spoke. "That development opportunity you wanted to discuss," he said quietly. "The one I was too proud to hear. Tell me about it." Samuel glanced over, surprised. "Mr. Langford, Victor, please call me Victor. Victor, I appreciate the sentiment, but you don't have to." "I want to," Victor interrupted, "not because I owe you, though I owe you my life, but because I've been doing business wrong for 23 years, and I'd like to try doing it right, even if just once." Samuel nodded slowly. "It's a community project, converting old farmland into a cooperative where struggling families can grow their own food, learn sustainable agriculture, support each other. It's not glamorous. The return on investment isn't impressive in dollars, but the return in lives changed, in dignity restored, in community built." He paused. "That's incalculable." Victor was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll invest, not from the bank, from my personal accounts, and I'd like to volunteer. I don't know anything about farming, but I can learn. You'd be willing to work the land, to get your hands dirty?" Victor looked down at his hands, already filthy from the day's rescue work, torn and bleeding in places. "I think," he said softly, "that's exactly what my hands need. To touch soil instead of paperwork, to build something that feeds people instead of just feeding my ego." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached Victor's neighborhood, they found it relatively untouched. The storm had spared the wealthy north side, taking its fury out on the working-class south and the modest downtown. The irony was not lost on either man. Victor's wife, Martha, ran from their grand house when she saw them, tears streaming down her face. She'd been trying to reach him for hours. She embraced him fiercely, then turned to Samuel. "You brought him home," she said, her voice breaking. "They said downtown was destroyed, that everyone there was, 'Oh, thank you, thank you.'" "Ma'am," Samuel said, tipping an invisible hat with old-fashioned courtesy. Victor walked Samuel back to his truck. At the door, the banker hesitated, then wrapped his arms around the farmer in an embrace that was awkward but deeply sincere. "I will never forget this," Victor said. "Any of it. The office, the storm, the tunnel, the work today. I will never forget who I was and who you showed me I could be." Samuel nodded. "Then it wasn't just a storm. It was a turning point. For both of us?" "For both of us," Samuel agreed. "Though I think you turned further than I did." Victor laughed, a real laugh, clean and unencumbered by pretense. "I had further to turn." Samuel drove home through the darkness, his body aching, his soul strangely light. The next morning, he would join the massive cleanup effort. The morning after that, he would help coordinate volunteers. And in the weeks to come, he would work alongside Victor Langford, teaching the banker about soil and seeds, about patience and faith, about the difference between building wealth and building worth. But that night he knelt beside his bed and prayed. He thanked the Creator for protection, for strength, for the opportunity to show love in action. And he prayed for Victor, not as an enemy anymore, but as a brother, confused and broken but capable of transformation. Outside his window, the stars were emerging through clearing clouds. The storm had passed. In its wake, something new was growing. 3 months later, the Whitfield-Langford Community Farm Project broke ground. The local newspaper ran a photo of the opening ceremony. A weathered farmer in clean overalls and a former banker in work clothes, both grinning, both holding shovels, both looking like men who had found something more valuable than everything they'd lost. In Victor's basement office, where he now worked on projects that mattered instead of just projects that profited, sat 2 objects on his desk. One was Samuel's Bible, loaned to him and opened to the passage about loving enemies. The other was a small stone, unremarkable except for its origin. Victor had found it in the railway tunnel after the storm and had kept it as a reminder. A reminder that pride can be shattered by forces beyond our control. But humility, true humility, is built to last. And in Samuel's farmhouse, on a shelf beside his grandfather's photographs, sat something new. A handwritten letter from Victor, framed, just 7 words long but containing a universe of meaning. "Thank you for seeing me as human. The world measures people by what they own, by their titles, by their accomplishments, but some measurements are invisible to the world and infinite in value. The measurement of grace given when grace was not deserved. The measurement of love offered to those who spat upon it. The measurement of a man who drives into a storm to save his enemy, because that's what mercy requires, what faith demands, what love compels." On Sundays, Samuel and Victor now sit in the same church pew, 2nd row on the left, under a stained glass window that depicts a storm. They are brothers now, bound not by blood but by something stronger, by the recognition that every person, no matter how high or how low, how successful or how humble, is worthy of dignity, capable of change, and redeemed by grace that refuses to give up on anyone. The banker learned to farm, the farmer learned to forgive. And in their unlikely friendship, others found hope that transformation is possible, that pride can be humbled without being destroyed, that love is stronger than scorn, and that storms, terrible as they are, sometimes clear the air so we can finally see what matters. Years later, when people in Ashmont tell the story of the storm, they don't just talk about the destruction or the rebuilding. They talk about 2 men, an enemy and a hero, who found brotherhood in a tunnel while the world screamed around them. They talk about how mercy is stronger than mockery, how grace is more powerful than pride, how love, real sacrificial love, has the power to save not just lives but souls. Samuel Whitfield never sought recognition for what he did. He continued farming, continued serving, continued loving, because that's what his faith called him to do. His Bible returned to him after Victor had read it cover to cover and covered it with his own notes and questions, remained his constant companion. Victor Langford never returned to the arrogant man he'd been. Oh, he still worked in finance, still made investments, still understood markets and money. But now he understood something more important, that the value of a human being has nothing to do with their bank balance, and everything to do with their capacity for love, for service, for seeing the divine in one another. The farm project thrived. 47 families found stability and hope through it. Children who might have gone hungry were fed. Adults who had lost their dignity and joblessness found purpose in cultivation. And at the center of it all, a farmer and a banker, unlikely partners, proof that redemption is real and available to anyone humble enough to accept it. On warm evenings, you can still find them there, working side by side in the fields. Two men who look like they come from different worlds because they did. But they ended up in the same place, their hands in the same soil, their hearts turned toward the same truth, that we are all equals under heaven, all worthy of love, all capable of change, all invited to lay down our pride and pick up something far more valuable. The Bible Samuel carried into that bank on that day of humiliation sits now in a glass case in the community center that the farm project built. It's open to the passage about loving enemies, about doing good to those who hate you. Visitors read it and wonder at the story behind it, at the storm and the tunnel and the transformation that followed. But Samuel knows the real miracle wasn't the survival. It wasn't even the change in Victor, dramatic as that was. The real miracle was simpler and more profound. It was the moment when mockery met mercy, and mercy won. It was the moment when pride faced humility, and pride blinked first. It was the moment when hate encountered love, and love refused to back down. That's the story Samuel tells when people ask about his scars, about his friendship with Victor, about why he risked his life for a man who had humiliated him. He tells them about a Bible passed down through generations, about faith that sustains through storms both literal and metaphorical, about love that doesn't keep score or hold grudges, but simply gives and gives and gives until the giving transforms everything it touches. And when they ask him if he ever regretted going back into that city, into that storm, for a man who had mocked him, Samuel just smiles. It's a gentle smile, weathered like his face, deep like his faith, and he says simply, "How could I regret doing what I was created to do?" In the end, that's what love is. Not a feeling, not an emotion, but a decision repeated daily, hourly, moment by moment, to see the person in front of you not as they see themselves, not as the world sees them, but as their Creator sees them. Flawed, struggling, broken in places, but infinitely valuable, eternally loved, and always capable of redemption. The storm that destroyed downtown Ashmont that day is remembered as one of the most powerful in the region's history. Buildings were rebuilt, infrastructure repaired, lives pieced back together. But for two men, a farmer and a banker, the storm did something more. It tore down walls that had been built over decades. It washed away pride that had accumulated like dust on old furniture. It cleared the air so that truth could finally be seen, and in that clarity, something beautiful grew. They say you can't change human nature. They say pride is too deep, hatred too ingrained, division too permanent. But Samuel Whitfield and Victor Langford prove otherwise. They stand as living testimony that transformation is possible, that redemption is real, that love, when it's authentic and sacrificial and stubborn enough to drive into storms for enemies, can change everything. Not overnight, not easily, not without pain and struggle and moments of doubt, but possible, always possible. Because some treasures can't be destroyed by storms. Some foundations are built on bedrock that no wind can shake. Some lights shine brightest in the darkest moments. And some love, the kind that requires everything and asks for nothing in return, the kind that drives into storms and carries broken enemies to safety, the kind that refuses to give up on anyone, no matter how far they've fallen or how cruel they've been. That love endures. It endures through mockery and scorn. It endures through pride and prejudice. It endures through storms, literal and metaphorical. It endures because it's not based on worthiness, but on grace. Not on deserving, but on decision. Not on reciprocation, but on reflection of something infinitely greater than ourselves. That's the message written across Samuel's life, across Victor's transformation, across their unlikely friendship. It's written in the soil they tend together, in the families they feed, in the community they've built. It's a message that says, love wins, not because it's easy or convenient or comfortable, but because love, real love, refuses to be defeated. And somewhere in heaven, 7 generations of Whitfields smile, knowing their Bible, their faith, their legacy lived on not in words but in action, not in preaching but in practice, not in judgment but in mercy. The storm passed, the rebuilding continues. And 2 men, once enemies, now brothers, continue to plant seeds in soil, in hearts, in souls, knowing that some harvests are measured not in bushels, but in lives transformed, not in profit, but in purpose, not in success, but in service. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the power of choosing mercy over mockery, love over scorn, forgiveness over revenge. It's the power that changes everything, one storm at a time, one tunnel at a time, one enemy loved at a time, until the world itself is transformed into something closer to what it was always meant to be. A place where every person is valued, every soul is precious, and every storm, no matter how terrible, is just a prelude to sunrise.